Zola arrived at the Jang Tower Hotel every morning at 6:45, same as always. 23 years old, uniform pressed, hair pinned back, name tag straight. 14 floors of guest rooms, then the executive corridor, then the supply closet on 14 restocked before 9 a.m. She knew this building better than most people knew their own names. Every blind corner in the service halls, every camera angle, every floor that creaked under a trolley wheel. Nobody knew her name. Not the front desk staff, not the concierge, certainly not the guests. She was the maid, the one who made disorder disappear, who moved through rooms like water and left no trace of herself behind. Invisible by training, invisible by necessity. She had learned early that invisibility was not a flaw in this job, it was the job. She had seen the hotel's owner exactly 3 times, Hanyul Jang, 32, sharp-featured, cold-eyed, the kind of man who walked through a room and made the air rearrange itself around him. His security details swept the floors before he arrived. His elevator was held, cleared, and waiting every morning at exactly 9 a.m. Nobody wrote it but him. She had never existed in his field of vision, not once. And then, at 8:48 on a Thursday morning, she heard 2 men speaking in the service corridor on the 14th floor, low voices, clipped and certain, and she caught one word that stopped her completely. Counterweight. She knew that word. Her brother back in Lagos had studied mechanical engineering. She had listened to him read from his textbooks for years. She knew exactly what counterweight meant inside an elevator shaft. She looked at her cleaning caddy, looked at the corridor, looked at the clock on the wall. 8:48 a.m. 12 minutes until Hanyul Jang stepped into that elevator. Zola set the caddy down and ran. 8:48 a.m., 12 minutes before. Hanyul Jang stood at his office window on the 30th floor, phone against his ear, watching the city the way a man watches something he has already won. 32 years old, built the Jang Tower organization from the ruins of his father's debts, through methods most people preferred not to examine too closely. He had restructured 3 companies, absorbed 2 rival syndicates, and personally renegotiated every alliance his father had left him, on his own terms, at a price of his own choosing. His assistant appeared in the doorway. "Sir, 9 o'clock briefing is ready." Hanyul didn't look up. "Is there anything that wasn't on last night's report?" "No, sir." "Then it can wait." The assistant left without another word. Good. Hanyul had no interest in meetings that repeated information he already had. He prided himself on knowing everything before anyone told him. Same elevator, same floor, same time every morning. Routine was control. Predictability was power. He had no way of knowing that his predictability had just been used against him, and that the only person in the building who understood what was about to happen was a hotel maid from Lagos who had been cleaning his floors for 8 months without him ever once looking at her. Zola had a system. She started on the 14th floor and worked her way down, rooms on the left side first, then the right, then the corridor windows, then the supply trolley restocked and parked before the executive sweep at 8:30. She had done it this way for 8 months without anyone asking her to. Nobody had noticed. That was the point. Back in Lagos, her mother used to say that the best workers were the ones who solved problems before anyone knew a problem existed. Zola had taken that seriously. She took most things seriously. She had to. Her mother was sick. Not the kind of sick that gets better with rest and medication you can actually afford. The kind that required a specialist, monthly treatments, and money that did not exist on a cleaner's salary in Lagos. So Zola had applied for the work visa, packed one bag, and flown to Seoul with a 2-year contract and a phone full of voice notes from her siblings telling her they would be fine. They were not fine without her, but they were fed, they were in school. That was what the money was for. She could not lose this job. That thought lived with her every single morning at 6:45 when she badged through the staff entrance. It sat with her while she pressed her uniform the night before, while she pinned her name tag straight, while she memorized the weekly guest list so she would never accidentally knock on an occupied room at the wrong hour. One complaint from the wrong guest, one incident report, one supervisor who decided she was more trouble than her visa was worth. That was all it would take. So Zola disappeared into her work. She made herself small, quiet, and impossibly efficient. She learned which guests left early, which ones ordered room service at midnight, which hallways the security team used for their internal radio checks. She learned the building the way you learn something when your survival depends on knowing it, completely and without being asked. She noticed everything. Not because she was suspicious by nature, because noticing was the whole job. A missing towel set meant a guest was about to call the front desk. A door left on the latch meant someone was expecting a visitor. A security guard taking a different route than usual meant something on that floor had changed. She noticed when Han-Yul Jang's morning sweep shifted from 8:40 to 8:35 in the 3rd month. She noticed when his security team added a second guard to the executive corridor in the 5th month. She noticed that he always rode the elevator alone, no staff, no aides, just the doors closing and the floor numbers climbing to 30. She had never spoken to him, never made eye contact. On the 2 occasions his path had crossed hers in the hallway, she had stepped aside and looked at the floor, the way you did when someone that powerful moved through a space and you understood instinctively that you were not part of the picture. He had looked through her both times. She was used to that. Being looked through was not the same as being gone. She was still there, still watching, still noticing. That habit, the quiet, constant habit of seeing what others missed, was the only reason she caught the word at 8:48. And the only reason Han-Yul Jang would still be alive by 9:15. At 8:30 every morning, Han-Yul Jang's assistant placed a single folder on the corner of his desk. Inside was the same thing it always contained: overnight reports, pending decisions, names of people who needed answers before noon. Han-Yul would read through it in 11 minutes, make 3 or 4 notes in the margin, and hand it back without comment. Then he would stand, button his jacket, and take the same route he always took, down the private hallway, left at the glass corridor, straight to the executive elevator. Same route, same elevator, same time, every single day. He did not think of this as predictability, he thought of it as precision. There was a difference in his mind. Predictable men were careless, precise men were in control. Han-Yul Jang believed he was always in control. His corner office on the 30th floor had windows on 2 sides. On clear mornings you could see all the way to the river. He rarely looked. The view was for visitors, something to make them feel small before the meeting started. Han-Yul himself had stopped being impressed by it years ago. The city below was not something he admired, it was something he managed. His staff understood this without being told. They did not make small talk with him. They did not linger after delivering information. They answered his questions directly and left the room. He had never instructed anyone to behave this way. He had never needed to. People read him quickly and adjusted. He was not a cruel man. He never raised his voice. He never made threats that were not entirely necessary. But there was something about the way he occupied a room, still, watchful, completely unbothered by silence, that made people careful around him. He did not demand respect, he simply made its absence feel uncomfortable. To Han-Yul, this was efficient. Sentiment slowed things down. Feelings complicated decisions that were better made cleanly. People worked for him. That meant they were useful, and useful things deserved to be maintained. It did not mean they were known. He could not have told you the name of the woman who cleaned his floor. He would not have thought that was a problem. What he had noticed, and quietly filed away without acting on, was that the last 3 weeks had felt slightly off. Small things. His security chief, Ren, had been slower than usual to return calls. 2 of his longest-serving inner team members had requested the same day off in the same week, separately, without explanation. A report that should have crossed his desk on Monday arrived on Wednesday, with no apology and no reason given. Individually, none of it meant anything. Schedules shifted, people had bad weeks. Organizations developed friction. That was normal. That was human. And Hanuel had always believed that minor friction corrected itself if you left it alone. So he had left it alone. He had attributed it to the pressure of a large deal closing at the end of the month. He had told himself that tightness in a system was sometimes a sign that the system was working hard. He had not considered the other explanation. He picked up the folder at 8:31, read it in 11 minutes, made 4 notes in the margin, and handed it back. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and started toward the elevator. The supply closet on the 14th floor was the last stop before Zola moved to the executive corridor. Towels on the left shelf, cleaning solution lined up by size, fresh room cards in the front pocket of the trolley. She had restocked this closet so many times that her hands moved without her thinking about it. That was why she heard them. When your hands know what to do, your mind goes quiet. And when your mind goes quiet, you notice things. 2 voices, coming from the service corridor on the other side of the supply room wall, low and clipped the way people speak when they do not want to carry. She could not see them, she did not move toward them. She just stopped what she was doing and listened, the way she had always listened, carefully, without making it obvious. At first, it was just sound, the shape of a conversation without the words. Then a phrase floated through clearly. "It'll hold for one more." She did not react. She stayed still and kept listening. Then the word counterweight. The air in the closet changed, or maybe it was just her, the way her body understood something a full second before her brain caught up. She had heard that word before, not in a hotel, not in a conversation like this one. She had heard it at the kitchen table in Lagos, her brother, Coffee, bent over his engineering textbook, reading passages out loud because he always said it helped him remember. She could still hear his voice. "The counterweight balances the cab, Zola. If the cable connecting them is damaged, the whole system fails. The cab drops. Nothing stops it." She had been 16. She had not been particularly interested in elevator mechanics, but she had listened, because listening was what she did. Because Coffee was proud of what he was learning, and she never wanted to be the person who made him feel like it did not matter. She had not known, at 16, that she would ever need that information. The laughter came next, short and low, the kind shared between 2 people who are satisfied with something. Then footsteps, moving away down the corridor, fading until she could not hear them at all. Zola stood in the supply closet with a stack of folded towels in her hands and felt something cold move through her chest. The executive elevator, Hanwell Jang, 9 a.m. same time every single morning without exception. She had watched the security team hold that elevator for him for 8 months. She had never once seen anyone else use it. "It'll hold for one more." She looked at the clock on the wall of the supply room. 28:48. 12 minutes. She set the towels down on the shelf, slowly at first, like part of her was still hoping she had misunderstood, like part of her was looking for a reason to go back to work and let this be someone else's problem. But she knew what she had heard, and she knew what the word meant, and she knew that in 12 minutes a man was going to step into an elevator that had been built to fail under his weight. She set the caddy against the wall, and she ran. The stairwell was faster than the elevator. That thought arrived quickly, and she was already moving, pushing through the heavy fire door and taking the stairs 2 at a time, her rubber soles squeaking against the concrete steps. No phone signal on 14. She had known that for months. The service corridors on the middle floors were dead zones, something about the building's structure blocking the network. She had complained about it once to a colleague in her first week. After that, she had simply adjusted, the way she adjusted to everything. But right now, flying down the stairwell with her heart loud in her ears, she needed a phone, and she did not have one that worked. She burst through the door onto the lobby level at 8:51. The front desk was closest. She crossed the marble floor at a half-run, aware of how she looked, maid's uniform, no trolley, breathing hard, and not caring. A receptionist glanced up with the smooth, practiced smile that dropped the moment she registered who was approaching. "I need to report something urgent, the executive elevator." "Housekeeping queries go through your floor supervisor." The receptionist's voice was flat. "I'd suggest you slow down before someone files a report on you." "You don't understand. The elevator has been—" "I'm going to call your supervisor right now if you don't return to your floor." 8:52, 1 minute gone. Zola turned away from the desk before the conversation could cost her another 30 seconds. She scanned the lobby. A security guard stood near the main entrance. Not Hanuel's personal detail, just standard hotel security. She moved toward him with her voice as calm as she could manage. "Ma'am, return to your station." "I'm not—" "Return to your station now or I remove you from the floor." His hand came up, not touching her, just positioned. A clear message. She was the problem. She was the thing that needed to be managed. 8:54. She backed away. Her chest was burning, less from running and more from the particular exhaustion of being dismissed by everyone she tried. She spotted 2 members of Hanuel's outer security detail near the elevator bank. She walked toward them with her hands visible, her pace measured, trying to look like someone delivering information rather than someone unraveling. The closer guard moved before she reached him, 1 step forward, eyes hard. "Do not come any closer." "I need to speak to Mr. Jang. It's about the elevator." "Stop talking and do not move." 8:56. 8 minutes left. Zola pressed her back against a pillar and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Her lungs hurt. Every door had closed. Every single person had looked at her uniform, her face, her breathlessness, and seen a problem instead of a warning. Then she heard Kofi's voice, not a memory she reached for, one that arrived on its own, calm and certain the way he always read aloud. "The cab drops, Zola. Nothing stops it." She opened her eyes. She pushed off the pillar and kept moving. She heard them before she saw them. The shift in the lobby was subtle. Staff straightening slightly, a receptionist looking up from her screen, the 2 guards near the elevator bank coming to attention. Zola had observed this routine enough times to recognize it instantly. Hanuel Jang was on his way down. She positioned herself near the center of the lobby, between the main corridor and the elevator bank. Her cleaning cloth was still in her hand. She had been gripping it since the 14th floor without realizing. Her breathing was ragged. She knew how she looked. She knew exactly what every person in this lobby would see when they glanced at her. She stood there anyway. 9:02 a.m. He came through the corridor entrance with his security chief on his left and 2 guards flanking behind. He was 2 minutes behind his usual schedule. She would only understand later how significant those 2 minutes were. His eyes were on his phone. His pace was steady and unhurried, the walk of a man who had never once been told to wait. The elevator doors were open, 20 feet away, waiting the way they always waited. 15 feet. Zola stepped forward, directly into his path. Everything happened in the space of 2 seconds. The nearest guard moved instantly, arm extending toward her shoulder. She did not look at him. She looked at Hanuel, and she said the word as loudly and as clearly as she had ever said anything in her life. "Counterweight." The guard's hand closed around her arm. She kept her eyes on Hanuel and said the rest of it. "They said it'll hold for 1 more." The guard was already pulling her sideways, his voice firm in her ear, "Ma'am, you need to come with me." And Hanuel's security chief was already stepping forward with 1 hand raised toward his boss, redirecting, guiding, the smooth, professional motion of a man managing a disruption. Then Hanuel stopped walking. not slowed, stopped, one foot still forward, mid-stride, like the word had reached something in him that his body responded to before his mind decided to. His security chief said his name, Sir, and placed a hand briefly on his arm. Hanuel raised one hand, just that, palm out, fingers relaxed. Everything stopped. The guard released her arm. The security chief went still. The lobby, which had been quietly rearranging itself around the disruption, seemed to hold its breath. Hanuel turned and looked at her. Not the way he had looked through her those 2 times before, not the absent, unfocused gaze of a man registering an obstacle. He looked at her the way she had seen him look at documents that required his full attention, directly, completely, without anything else in the way. She met his eyes and did not look down. Her heart was hitting her ribs hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Her uniform was creased from running. Her hair had come partially loose from its pin. She stood completely still and held his gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hanuel Jang, in a voice that was quiet and entirely serious, said, "Say that again." She repeated everything. The 2 voices in the service corridor. The phrase she had caught first, "It'll hold for one more." The word after it. The laughter that followed, easy and satisfied. The sound of men who believed they had already won. Hanuel listened without interrupting. His expression did not change. When she finished, he was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned to his security chief. "Test the elevator." Ren's response was immediate. "Sir, this is a hotel maid who—" "I heard what she is." Hanuel's voice did not rise. It never rose. But something in it shifted, the way a temperature shifts. You cannot point to the exact moment it changed, you just feel the room get colder. "Test the elevator, now." Ren held his gaze for half a second longer than was comfortable. Then he reached for his radio. The lobby was cleared in under 2 minutes. Guests redirected, staff moved back, the elevator bank cordoned off with the quiet efficiency of a security team that had trained for disruption even when it didn't believe one was coming. Zola was guided to a spot near the far wall, not roughly, but firmly. She stayed where they put her and watched. The building's cable engineer was reached by phone and on the 14th floor within 3 minutes. Zola heard someone say his name was Park. She watched him cross the lobby with a tablet under his arm and a look on his face that said he had been pulled away from something and expected this to be nothing. He consulted briefly with Ren, disappeared into the service access panel beside the elevator, came back out 2 minutes later with a different look on his face entirely. He said something to Ren in a low voice. Ren looked at the elevator, then at Hanuel. "We need to run a load test." The test pallet was a steel frame used for freight assessments. It weighed slightly more than an adult male. They loaded it onto the elevator cab, sent the doors closed, and activated the ascent from the engineer's panel. The cab rose 4 floors. Then the engineer triggered the counterweight diagnostic. What happened next took 2 seconds. The sound reached the lobby before anyone fully processed what they were seeing on the readout. A deep, structural drop, metal against concrete, the kind of impact that does not echo so much as it settles into the floor beneath your feet. 30 floors, 2 seconds, the readout flatlined. Nobody spoke. Ren had gowned a color of paper. The engineer was already on his phone, his voice tight and clipped. 2 of the guards were staring at the readout screen as if they expected the numbers to change. Hanuel was not looking at the screen. He was looking at the lobby, slowly, methodically, moving from face to face the way you scan a room when you already know the answer and you are simply locating it. His eyes settled briefly on 2 members of his outer security detail standing near the service corridor entrance. One of them glanced toward the exit. That glance was enough. "Lock the building," Hanuel said it, once, quietly. The 2 men turned and walked quickly toward the service exit. They made it as far as the handle. They did not make it through. The corridor outside the elevator service room was quiet now. The noise had moved elsewhere. Raised voices in the lobby, radio calls, the controlled urgency of a security team working through something that could not be explained away. Zola sat on the floor with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up to her chest. A guard had walked her here 20 minutes ago, told her to stay, and disappeared back toward the action. She had done as she was told. She was good at that. And besides, her legs had stopped feeling entirely reliable somewhere around the moment the readout flatlined, and sitting down had felt less like a choice and more like a necessity. The shaking had started after. That was how it always worked, she knew. Your body holds everything together while it needs to, and then, when the crisis passes, it quietly presents you with the bill. Her hands were trembling slightly in her lap. She pressed them flat against her knees and looked at the wall across from her and breathed. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. She recognized the pace, unhurried, deliberate, the walk of a man who decided where he was going before he moved. Hanyuel Jang came around the corner, saw her on the floor, and stopped. His security detail was 2 steps behind him. She watched the nearest guard's expression shift into something uncertain, waiting for an instruction that would make sense of what was about to happen. Hanyuel lowered himself to the floor and sat beside her. Not in a chair pulled from a nearby room, not crouched down in a way that kept some distance. He sat on the corridor floor with his back against the wall, his tailored jacket settling around him, close enough that she could have reached out and touched his sleeve. Behind him, his guards looked at each other. Hanyuel did not look at them. "What is your name?" His voice was the same as it had been in the lobby, quiet, direct, like the question was the only thing in the room. "Zola," she said. "Zola Adeyemi." He nodded slowly, as if placing it somewhere careful. "How did you know that word?" She told him about Kofi, her brother in Lagos, bent over his engineering textbook at the kitchen table, reading out loud because it helped him remember. She told him she had never studied engineering, had never needed to, had simply listened because Kofi was proud and she loved him, and that was enough of a reason. She told him about the visa, the 2 years, the money she sent home every month for her mother's treatment and her siblings' school fees. She told him all of it plainly, without dressing it up. He listened the same way he had listened in the lobby, completely. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "Every person you went to turned you away. Why did you keep trying?" She looked at him, not at the floor, not at her hands, at him. "Because someone was going to get hurt." She said it simply, the way you state something that does not require explanation. Not a performance of bravery, just a fact about who she was. Hanyuel Jang looked at the wall across the corridor. He did not speak for a long time. The message came through her floor supervisor on a Tuesday morning. "Report to the 30th floor conference room at 10 a.m. Do not bring your trolley." Zola read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her uniform pocket and finished restocking the linen shelf on 12 because her hands needed something to do. She knew what it meant, or she thought she did. 2 days had passed since the elevator. 2 days of working her normal shift, keeping her head down, saying nothing to the other staff beyond what the job required. She had told herself that this was the right approach, that drawing attention to what happened would only make things complicated, that men like Hanyuel Jang resolved situations quietly and expected the people involved to do the same. She had assumed being quiet would keep her safe. She had not considered that it might already be too late for that. At 9:58, she rode the staff elevator to 30. She straightened her name tag outside the conference room door. Then she pushed it open. Hanyuel was already there. He was seated at the far end of the table with a man she did not recognize. Older, glasses, a briefcase open beside him. the particular stillness of someone who worked in law. Between them sat a plain brown folder. There was a chair on the other side of the table. Zola sat in it. Hanuel spoke first. "I spent 2 days trying to calculate what I owe you." He said it directly, no preamble. "I came up with a number. I'll tell you what it was in a moment. But first—" He nodded toward the folder. She opened it. The first page was a visa document, not a renewal of the 2-year contract she currently held, a 5-year residency authorization, upgraded classification, effective immediately. Her name was already printed at the top. The second page was an employment letter, a new title she did not fully process at first because her eyes had moved immediately to the salary figure at the bottom of the page. She read it. Then she read it again. Her hands were not entirely steady when she turned to the third page. A medical fund, established in her mother's name, covering full specialist treatment, ongoing care, and associated costs for as long as required. Behind that, an education endowment, both of her siblings, through university, fully covered, no conditions attached. Zola sat with the folder open in her hands and looked at the pages and did not trust herself to speak. "The number I arrived at," Hanuel said quietly, "was significant. And then I realized it was wrong." She looked up. "The calculation only accounted for my life. It didn't account for what you reminded me of." He was measured, choosing each word carefully, the way she had noticed he did when something actually mattered to him. "I have spent 32 years believing that people who act from conscience rather than self-interest are naive, that the world does not actually work that way, that everyone eventually is driven by what they stand to gain." He paused. "Every door in that building closed in your face. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose." His voice was even. "And you kept going." He looked at the folder in her hands. "I was the naive one." The lawyer was quiet. The room was quiet. Outside the windows, the city moved the way it always moved, indifferent and constant. Zola looked down at her mother's name on the third page and finally let herself breathe. 1 year later, the Jang Tower had a new sign in the staff training room on the 3rd floor. It was not large or decorative, plain lettering on a clean background, the way Zola would have chosen if anyone had asked her, which they hadn't because Hanuel had simply made the decision and she had found out about it the same way the rest of the staff did, arriving one Monday morning to find it already there. The Adayami Hospitality Program, supporting international workers in building careers with dignity. She had stood in front of it for a long moment before her shift started, then she had gone to work. The program ran twice a year. It covered language support, workplace rights, professional development, and mentorship for international staff across the hotel's 3 properties. 12 people had completed the first intake, 23 were enrolled in the second. Hanuel funded it entirely through his organization, without announcement or press coverage. That had been his only condition when he set it up. He was done with things that were designed to be seen. The restructuring of his inner circle had taken 4 months. It was not a process he had enjoyed or rushed. He had gone slowly and deliberately, the way you do when you realize that speed was part of what got you into trouble. Every person he brought close now had been chosen for one reason only, not history, not leverage, not mutual benefit, but character. What they did when no one was watching, whether their actions matched their words over time. It was a harder standard to apply than he had expected. It required him to pay attention in ways he had previously considered unnecessary, to notice people, to learn their names and their circumstances, and what they actually valued. He was still learning how to do it, but he was learning. Zola's promotion had come in the 4th month when the guest experience manager position opened and her floor supervisor submitted her name without being asked. Hanuel had approved it without hesitation. The other candidates were qualified. Zola was exceptional, and the hotel had simply finally looked long enough to see it. She was good at the role, better than good. She noticed things, patterns in guest feedback, small gaps in staff communication, the kind of problems that compounded quietly before anyone thought to name them. She solved most of them before they reached management. Old habits, now with the authority to match. Her mother's treatment was ongoing. The last update from Lagos had been cautiously positive. The specialist was pleased with her progress, the medication was working, she had started cooking again for the first time in 2 years. Zola's brother Kofi had started his final year of university. Her younger sister had just been accepted into secondary school on an academic scholarship. Zola kept the acceptance letter folded in her desk drawer. She read it sometimes on difficult days. On the wall of Hanuel's office, beside the window that looked out over the city he had spent a decade trying to control, there was a single photograph in a plain frame. A hotel corridor, a woman in a beige housekeeping uniform. In the background, the open doors of an elevator shaft, empty, silent, 30 floors of nothing where a man's life used to be scheduled to end. He had put it there himself the week after the restructuring was complete. His assistant had asked if he wanted it hung somewhere less visible. He had said no. It was not a decoration. It was not a reminder of how close he had come to dying. It was a reminder of what he had almost missed entirely, that the most powerful thing he had ever encountered in 32 years of building and fighting and calculating was a young woman with nothing to gain and everything to lose, who had simply refused to walk away. He had looked through her for 8 months. He would not make that mistake again.